Sometimes the most extraordinary acts of courage emerge from the simplest hearts. On a fog-shrouded evening in Millbrook Valley, Clyde Miller's calloused hands were meant for nothing more than fixing his daughter's broken bicycle chain. Instead, they would pull a bleeding police officer from a mangled patrol car, while his loyal German shepherd would orchestrate a rescue that would save 3 lives in ways no one could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn mist clung to the hills surrounding Millbrook Valley like a gray blanket, muffling the sounds of the small mountain town as it settled into evening. Clyde Miller stood on the front porch of his modest 2-story house on Elderwood Drive, his weathered carpenter's hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee. At 35, his face already bore the lines of a man who had carried more than his share of responsibility, each crease a testament to sleepless nights and endless worry. "Dad, Rex is doing that thing again," called 12-year-old Emma from somewhere inside the house, her voice carrying the exasperated tone that only a preteen could master. Clyde smiled, despite the weight pressing on his shoulders. Rex, their 3-year-old German shepherd, had developed an unusual habit of organizing Emma's homework by subject, carefully moving her math worksheets to one pile and her English papers to another. The dog's intelligence had always bordered on uncanny, but lately his behavior had become almost human-like in its complexity. "Let him finish, Em," Clyde called back, taking another sip of his coffee. "Maybe he'll solve your algebra problems while he's at it." Emma appeared in the doorway, her auburn hair, so much like her mother's, falling in waves around her face. "Very funny, Dad. But seriously, it's kind of weird how he does that." Clyde's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. 3 years had passed since the accident that took his wife Sarah, and sometimes he still felt like he was drowning in the responsibility of raising Emma alone. His carpentry business barely kept them afloat, especially with the medical bills from Sarah's final months still casting a shadow over their finances. "Weird can be good sometimes, sweetheart," he said, ruffling her hair as she joined him on the porch. Rex appeared at the screen door, his intelligent brown eyes fixed on something in the distance that neither Clyde nor Emma could see. The dog's ears were perked forward, his body alert and tense. "What is it, boy?" Clyde asked, but Rex was already pushing through the screen door, his attention focused on the winding mountain road that led down from the police station. The fog was thickening as evening deepened, creating an almost ethereal quality to the familiar landscape. Clyde's workshop sat adjacent to their house, its windows glowing warmly from the security lights he'd installed after a break-in attempt the year before. Tools hung in perfect order on pegboards, and half-finished furniture projects waited patiently for his attention. It was his sanctuary, the place where he could create something beautiful from raw materials, much like he was trying to do with Emma's childhood despite their circumstances. "Dad, can we work on my bike tonight?" Emma asked, gesturing toward the pink mountain bike propped against the workshop wall. Its chain had snapped that morning on her way to school, leaving her to walk the final 3 blocks and arrive late to first period. "After dinner," he promised, though he wasn't sure when he'd find the energy. He'd been working on a custom dining set for the Weatherbees all week, and the deadline was approaching fast. The commission was important. It would cover Emma's school supplies for the semester and maybe even allow for a small emergency fund. Rex began pacing along the porch railing, a low whine escaping his throat. The dog's behavior was becoming increasingly agitated, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the mountain road. "Rex, what's gotten into you?" Emma asked, reaching out to pet him, but the dog barely acknowledged her touch. Clyde studied his loyal companion with growing concern. In the 3 years since Sarah's death, Rex had been their constant guardian and companion. The dog seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to sense when either Emma or Clyde needed comfort, appearing at their sides during difficult moments with an intuition that often left Clyde speechless. But this was different. Rex's alertness wasn't the comfortable vigilance of a family protector. It was the tense awareness of an animal sensing imminent danger. As if summoned by Rex's premonition, the distant sound of a car engine echoed through the fog-laden valley, growing louder as it wound its way down the treacherous mountain road that connected Millbrook Valley to the outside world. Neither Clyde nor Emma could have imagined that in just a few minutes that approaching vehicle would transform their quiet evening into a life-or-death situation that would test everything Clyde believed about courage, sacrifice, and the extraordinary bond between a man and his dog. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The screech of tires cutting through the fog-muffled evening shattered the peaceful atmosphere of Elderwood Drive like glass against concrete. Rex's ears shot up instantly, his powerful body tensing as if electrified. Before Clyde could even process what he was hearing, the German Shepherd was already bounding down the porch steps, his intelligence laser-focused on something happening beyond their vision in the thickening mist. "Rex, wait!" Clyde called out, but the dog had already disappeared into the gray veil that had settled over their mountain valley. The sound that followed made Clyde's blood run cold. The distinctive, sickening crunch of metal against metal, followed by the grinding scrape of a vehicle sliding off asphalt onto gravel. Then, silence. A silence so complete it seemed to swallow even the usual evening sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. "Dad, what was that?" Emma's voice carried a tremor of fear as she pressed against his side. "Stay here," Clyde commanded, his carpenter's instincts already calculating distances and dangers. The crash had come from the sharp curve where Elderwood Drive met Mountain View Road, a notorious blind spot where the fog always settled thickest. He'd lobbied the town council for better lighting there for years, knowing it was an accident waiting to happen. "But Dad—" "Emma, I mean it. Stay on the porch." His voice carried an authority that brooked no argument, the same tone he'd used 3 years ago when he'd rushed Sarah to the hospital for the last time. "Call 911. Tell them there's been an accident at the intersection of Elderwood and Mountain View." Clyde grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from his workshop and sprinted into the fog, his heart hammering against his ribs. The mist seemed to part around him as he ran, and through the gray curtain he could make out the ghostly outline of Rex standing perfectly still in the middle of the road. What Clyde saw when he reached the intersection stopped him in his tracks. A police cruiser. Patricia Hendricks's patrol car, he realized with growing horror, had collided head-on with a massive oak tree. The impact had been devastating. The front end of the vehicle was completely crushed, steam rising from the destroyed engine block, while the driver's side door hung at an impossible angle. But what made Clyde's stomach lurch was the spiderweb of cracks across the windshield, painted red with what could only be blood. Rex stood at the passenger side of the wreckage, his intelligent brown eyes fixed on Clyde with an intensity that seemed almost human. The dog's posture was rigid with purpose, and he was making a low, continuous sound, not quite a whine, not quite a bark, but something that conveyed urgent communication. "Officer Hendricks," Clyde shouted, approaching the driver's side cautiously. The car's position was precarious, tilted at an angle that suggested the slightest disturbance might send it rolling down the embankment into the creek below. Through the shattered windshield, he could see Patricia slumped over the steering wheel, her usually pristine uniform dark with blood. Her radio was crackling with static and garbled dispatcher calls, but she wasn't responding. A deep gash across her forehead was bleeding freely, and her breathing was shallow and labored. "Patricia, can you hear me?" Clyde reached for the driver's side door handle, but Rex's sharp bark stopped him cold.
The German Shepherd had moved to block his path, positioning himself between Clyde and the unstable vehicle. Rex's body language was unmistakably clear. "Don't touch that door." For a moment, Clyde hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to pull Patricia from the wreckage immediately, but Rex had never been wrong about danger before. The dog's uncanny ability to sense structural instability had saved them countless times during construction projects. Rex had once refused to let Emma enter their workshop minutes before a poorly secured shelf collapsed exactly where she would have been standing. Instead of forcing the driver's door, Clyde followed Rex's lead and moved to the passenger side. The dog was now pawing at something near the front wheel, a hydraulic jack from Patricia's emergency kit that had been thrown clear during the impact. "You want me to stabilize the car first?" Clyde breathed, understanding flooding through him. Rex's intelligence was showing him the safest approach. Working quickly, Clyde positioned the jack under the vehicle's frame, using his carpenter's knowledge of weight distribution and leverage points. Rex supervised every move, occasionally nudging Clyde's hands toward better positions or blocking him from angles that would destabilize the wreckage further. "Good boy, Rex, you're absolutely right," Clyde murmured as he worked. The dog's problem-solving abilities were beyond anything he'd ever witnessed. It was as if Rex could visualize the physics of the situation in ways that escaped human understanding. Once the car was secured, Rex moved to the passenger door and began pawing at the handle. This door opened with a grinding protest of twisted metal, revealing Patricia's unconscious form more clearly. She was in bad shape. The head wound was just the beginning. Clyde could see her left arm was bent at an unnatural angle, likely broken, and there were dark stains on her uniform that suggested internal injuries. Her face was pale beneath the blood, and her pulse, when Clyde checked it, was weak and thready. "Help's coming, Patricia," he said, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "Just hold on." But even as he spoke, Clyde realized with growing dread that help might not arrive in time. Millbrook Valley's volunteer ambulance service was understaffed and based 20 minutes away on a good day. In this fog, with the treacherous mountain roads, it could be much longer. Rex had moved away from the car and was now standing in the middle of the intersection, his attention focused intently on something in the distance. The dog's posture had changed again. He was alert, but no longer agitated. Instead, his body language suggested he was calculating, planning. Then Clyde heard it, the rumble of a heavy engine approaching through the fog. Rex's ears perked forward, and he began moving with deliberate purpose toward the sound. A moment later, the headlights of a large pickup truck emerged from the mist, traveling slowly down Mountain View Road. Rex positioned himself directly in the vehicle's path, his intelligent eyes reflecting the headlights as he stood his ground. The truck slowed to a stop, and Clyde recognized the driver immediately, Dr. Elena Vasquez, the town's only physician, returning from her evening rounds at the nursing home. She rolled down her window, clearly puzzled by the German shepherd blocking her path. "Rex?" she called out, recognizing the dog. "What are you—" That's when she saw Clyde kneeling beside the wreckage, illuminated by his flashlight, and Patricia's blood-stained form visible through the passenger door. Rex had done it again. Somehow, the dog had known exactly when and how to intercept the one person in town who could provide the medical expertise Patricia desperately needed. It wasn't just intelligence, it was as if Rex possessed an almost supernatural ability to orchestrate solutions to complex problems. As Dr. Elena Vasquez grabbed her medical bag and rushed toward the accident scene, Clyde found himself staring at his remarkable dog with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The evening that had started with fixing a bicycle chain was rapidly becoming something much more significant. But neither Clyde nor Rex knew that their heroic actions were just the beginning. Hidden in the fog-shrouded woods surrounding the accident scene, 2 more lives hung in the balance, lives that only Rex's extraordinary intelligence would be able to save. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked with the focused intensity of someone who had spent 15 years practicing emergency medicine in rural settings, where every second could mean the difference between life and death. Her skilled hands moved quickly over Patricia's injuries, while Clyde held the flashlight steady, creating a small pool of clinical light in the fog-shrouded chaos of the accident scene. Pupils are responsive, but she's got a significant concussion, Elena murmured, her voice carrying the calm authority that had made her invaluable to Millbrook Valley's small community. The head wound looks worse than it is, but I'm more concerned about potential internal bleeding. We need to get her to a trauma center immediately. Clyde watched as Elena worked, impressed by her efficiency despite the challenging conditions. He'd known Dr. Vasquez for years. She'd treated Emma for everything from strep throat to a broken wrist from a bicycle accident. But he'd never seen her operate in full emergency mode. The transformation was remarkable. "The ambulance should be here soon," Clyde offered. Though even as he spoke, he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. The fog was getting thicker, and the mountain roads were treacherous even in good weather.
Elena's expression darkened. Soon might not be soon enough. She's going into shock, and without proper equipment, she trailed off, unwilling to voice the grim prognosis they both understood. That's when Rex began behaving strangely again. The German shepherd had been sitting quietly near the stabilized patrol car, apparently content that the immediate crisis was under control. But now he was on his feet, moving in a wide circle around the accident scene with his nose to the ground. His movements were methodical, purposeful, as if he was following an invisible trail that only he could detect. "Rex, what are you doing, boy?" Clyde called softly, not wanting to disturb Elena's work but concerned about his dog's sudden fixation. Rex paused at the edge of the embankment where the creek ran parallel to the road. He looked back at Clyde, then at the wreckage, then turned his attention to something in the darkness below. A low whine escaped his throat. Not distress, but communication. He was trying to tell them something. "Clyde," Elena said urgently, "I need you to keep pressure on this bandage while I check her vitals again." But Clyde was watching Rex with growing unease. The dog had found something down by the creek, something that was making him increasingly agitated. Rex began barking, short, sharp sounds that carried an unmistakable note of alarm. "There's something down there," Clyde said, torn between helping Elena and investigating his dog's discovery. "What do you mean something?" Elena looked up from Patricia's still form, following Clyde's gaze toward the embankment. Rex's barking became more insistent. Then, cutting through the fog and the dog's alarm calls, came a sound that made both Clyde and Elena freeze. A child's weak cry for help. "Oh my God," Elena breathed. "There are other victims." Clyde's mind raced. The collision had been violent enough to throw debris across a wide area. It was possible that passengers had been ejected from the vehicle, or that there had been a second car involved that they hadn't yet discovered in the fog. "Stay with Patricia," Clyde said, already moving toward the embankment. "I'll check it out." "Clyde, be careful. If there are more injured people down there, we need to assess the situation properly before—" But Rex was already scrambling down the steep slope, using his sure footing navigating the treacherous terrain with an urgency that suggested lives were at stake. Clyde followed him, using his flashlight to pick his way carefully down the rocky incline. What he found at the bottom of the embankment defied explanation. A small camping tent was partially collapsed near the creek bed, its bright orange fabric torn and muddy. Beside it, a camping stove had been overturned, and scattered supplies suggested that someone had been camping illegally in the woods, something that occasionally happened despite the posted warnings about unstable ground near the creek. But it was what Rex was doing that took Clyde's breath away. The German shepherd was gently nudging a young boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, who was lying motionless near the tent. The child was unconscious, his small face pale in the flashlight beam. But that wasn't all. Rex was also keeping watch over a teenage girl, maybe 15 or 16, who was curled up several feet away, prying softly and clutching her leg. "Hey," Clyde called gently as he approached. "It's okay. I'm here to help. What happened?" The teenage girl looked up through tears, her face streaked with dirt and fear. "The ground just gave way. We were camping, and then there was this loud crash from up on the road, and the embankment started sliding. Tommy got hit by a falling branch, and I think my leg is broken." Clyde knelt beside the unconscious boy, Tommy, and checked for vital signs. The child was breathing, but there was a nasty bruise on his temple where the branch had struck him. The girl's leg was indeed badly injured, twisted at an angle that made Clyde wince. "What are your names?" he asked gently, trying to keep the girl calm while he assessed the situation. "I'm Jesse, and that's my little brother Tommy. We're, we're not supposed to be here." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Our mom thinks we're at a friend's house, but we wanted to go camping by ourselves. Are we in trouble?" The pieces began falling into place. Two kids camping illegally, hidden from view by the fog and the natural camouflage of the wooded creek bed. When Patricia's accident had destabilized the embankment, it had triggered a small landslide that had trapped them down here with no way to call for help. Without Rex's incredible ability to detect their presence, Jesse and Tommy would have remained hidden until it was too late. The fog would have concealed them from any rescue teams, and the girl's injuries prevented her from climbing back up to the road. "You're not in trouble," Clyde assured Jesse, while his mind calculated the complexity of their situation. Rex was now moving between the two children with what could only be described as protective purpose. He seemed to understand that Tommy's head injury was the more serious concern, positioning himself where he could keep the boy warm while maintaining visual contact with Jesse. "Dr. Vasquez," Clyde called up the embankment, "we've got two more victims down here, one with a head injury, one with what looks like a broken leg." Elena's voice drifted down through the fog, tight with stress. "How bad?" "The boy's unconscious. The girl's stable but can't walk."
There was a moment of silence as Elena processed this information. 3 critically injured patients, no ambulance yet arrived, and weather conditions that made any kind of evacuation extremely challenging. "We need to prioritize," Elena called back. "The head injury is the most time-sensitive. Can you stabilize them both while I finish with Patricia?" Clyde looked around the small creek bed, taking inventory of available resources. The camping gear was scattered but intact. Sleeping bags, a first aid kit, even a small camping lantern that would provide better light than his flashlight. Rex seemed to read his thoughts. The dog moved to the overturned camping stove and began pawing at something beneath it. When Clyde investigated, he found a cell phone in a waterproof case, Jesse's phone, which had somehow survived the landslide. "Jesse, what's your mother's number?" Clyde asked urgently. As the girl recited the number through her tears, Clyde realized that Rex had done more than just find 2 additional victims. He had orchestrated their discovery at the exact moment that they could still be saved, had led him to the medical supplies they needed, and had even helped locate their means of contacting the children's family. But the most remarkable thing was how Rex continued to monitor all 3 victims simultaneously. Even now, the dog was dividing his attention between Tommy's motionless form, Jesse's injuries, and the sounds from up on the road where Patricia fought for her life. It was as if Rex understood that his role wasn't just to find people in trouble, it was to coordinate a complex rescue operation that human minds alone couldn't have managed in these conditions. As Clyde worked to stabilize the children using the camping supplies, he found himself marveling at the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. Patricia's accident, his decision to follow Rex into the fog, the dog's uncanny ability to detect danger and opportunity alike. It all felt orchestrated by some intelligence far beyond normal canine instincts. "Clyde!" Elena's voice carried a new note of urgency. "I can hear sirens. The ambulance is finally coming." But even as relief flooded through him, Clyde knew that the most challenging part of this rescue was still ahead. 3 seriously injured people, treacherous conditions, and a community about to discover that their quiet evening had become a test of everything they valued about looking out for one another. Rex sat between the 2 children, his intelligent eyes reflecting the camping lantern's glow, waiting for the next phase of his remarkable rescue operation to begin. The arrival of the Millbrook Valley volunteer ambulance crew brought both relief and new complications to the fog-shrouded rescue scene. EMT Captain Jake Morrison and his partner, Beth Chen, emerged from their vehicle like seasoned professionals, but Clyde could see the immediate concern in their faces as they assessed the situation. "Single vehicle accident with multiple casualties. We've got an officer with head trauma and possible internal injuries up here, plus 2 children trapped in the creek bed below with additional injuries." Jake's weathered face, earned from 20 years of emergency response in the mountain region, showed the kind of calm focus that came from handling complex rescues. "Beth, get the trauma kit and start with the officer. I'll assess the situation below." As the EMTs took charge of the immediate medical crisis, something remarkable began to unfold. Rex, who had been moving between the three victims with purposeful precision, started exhibiting behavior that went beyond even his usual extraordinary intelligence. The German Shepherd approached Jake as he prepared to descend the embankment, carrying something in his mouth, a coil of climbing rope from Tommy and Jesse's camping gear. But rather than simply dropping it at his feet, Rex began demonstrating something that left everyone watching in stunned silence. The dog took one end of the rope in his teeth and moved to a sturdy oak tree near the embankment's edge. With deliberate movements, the dog began wrapping the rope around the tree trunk, creating what any experienced climber would recognize as the foundation of a proper belay anchor. "I've never seen anything like this," Jake murmured to Clyde. "It's like he understands rope rescue techniques." But Rex wasn't finished. After securing the anchor point, the dog picked up a metal camping stake and began pawing at a specific spot on the ground, a location that Clyde realized would provide the optimal angle for a controlled descent to where the children were trapped. Emma's voice suddenly cut through the fog from the direction of their house. "Dad! Dad, where are you?" Clyde felt his heart skip. In the chaos of the rescue, he'd forgotten his explicit instructions for Emma to stay on the porch. "I'm here, Emma. Stay back from the road." But Emma was already approaching, having followed the sound of voices in the flashing lights of the ambulance. When she saw the accident scene, her young face went pale with shock. "Is Officer Hendricks going to be okay?" she asked in the small voice, remembering the kindness Patricia had shown her during the museum field trip. "The doctors are taking good care of her," Clyde assured his daughter, though he could see Emma's sharp 12-year-old mind processing the severity of the situation. That's when Rex did something that demonstrated the true depth of his intelligence. The dog approached Emma and gently took hold of her jacket sleeve, leading her away from the dangerous embankment area to a safe position near the ambulance where she could observe without being at risk.
But Rex didn't stop there. The dog seemed to recognize that Emma's presence could actually be helpful to the rescue effort. He guided her to a spot where she had a clear view of both the road-level rescue and the creek bed below, positioning her as an informal communication relay point. "Emma," Jake called out, having observed Rex's tactical positioning, "can you keep watch up here while your dad helps me with the children? If Dr. Vasquez needs anything, you can let us know immediately." Emma nodded solemnly, understanding the responsibility being placed on her young shoulders. Rex remained at her side, as if appointed as her guardian and co-coordinator for this phase of the rescue. Down in the creek bed, the complexity of the situation became even more apparent. Tommy was beginning to regain consciousness, which was encouraging from a medical standpoint, but created new challenges as the disoriented boy became frightened and resistant to help. "Where's my mom?" Tommy mumbled, his words slurred from the head injury. I want to go home." Jessie, despite her own pain from the broken leg, was trying to comfort her little brother. "It's okay, Tommy. These people are helping us. Mom's gonna come get us soon." Clyde found himself impressed by the teenager's maturity under pressure. Despite being in significant pain and clearly scared, Jessie was putting her brother's needs first, a quality that reminded him of Emma's own strength during their family's difficult times. Rex descended the embankment with the sure-footed confidence of a mountain goat, immediately positioning himself where Tommy could see him. The boy's fear seemed to diminish at the sight of the gentle German Shepherd, and Rex somehow understood to remain perfectly still, allowing Tommy to reach out and touch his fur for comfort. "He's beautiful," Tommy whispered, his small fingers tangled in Rex's coat. "What's his name?" "Rex," Clyde said gently. "He's the one who found you and your sister. He knew you were down here when nobody else did." As Jake worked to stabilize Jessie's leg using supplies from both the ambulance and the camping gear, Rex continued his remarkable coordination of the rescue effort. The dog moved between positions, seemingly monitoring every aspect of the operation. When Beth called down that they needed additional bandaging material, Rex immediately went to the scattered camping supplies and retrieved a first aid kit that had been overlooked in the initial chaos. When Tommy became agitated again due to his concussion, Rex positioned himself as a calming presence, somehow knowing exactly how much contact the injured boy could tolerate. "I've been an EMT for 15 years, Jake said quietly to Clyde as they worked together to prepare Tommy for transport, "and I've never seen anything like what your dog is doing. It's like he has medical training." The comment triggered a memory for Clyde. Sarah, his late wife, had occasionally brought Rex to the veterinary clinic where she worked during his puppy years. The dog had been exposed to medical procedures, emergency protocols, and the calm, purposeful atmosphere of healthcare professionals responding to crises. But what Rex was demonstrating went far beyond learned behavior. The dog was problem-solving in real time, adapting to circumstances that he'd never encountered before, and coordinating multiple aspects of a complex rescue operation. "Tommy's vital signs are stabilizing," Beth reported from her position monitoring the boy, "but we need to get him to the hospital as soon as possible for a proper neurological assessment." That's when the next challenge presented itself. The ambulance could transport 2 patients, but they had 3 critically injured people who all needed immediate hospital care. The nearest trauma center was a 40-minute drive even in good conditions, and the fog was making travel treacherous. Rex seemed to sense this dilemma before the humans had fully processed it. The dog moved to the edge of the creek bed and began barking in a specific pattern. Short, sharp barks, followed by longer howls. It was clearly a signal, but a signal to whom? The answer came in the form of headlights approaching through the fog. Dr. Marcus Webb, Millbrook Valley's retired physician and Elena's mentor, was driving slowly down Mountain View Road in his old pickup truck. Rex's calls had somehow reached him from nearly a quarter-mile away. "Elena," Dr. Webb called as he parked behind the ambulance, "I heard the commotion and thought you might need assistance." The presence of a second physician transformed their options. Now they had the medical expertise to split the patients between 2 vehicles if necessary, ensuring that each victim received proper monitoring during transport. But Rex had one more surprise in store for them. As the medical team prepared for the complex logistics of evacuating 3 patients, the German Shepherd approached Clyde and began the same purposeful behavior he demonstrated with the rope earlier. This time, Rex was carrying Emma's school backpack, which he had somehow retrieved from their house during one of his movements between rescue positions. Inside the backpack, wrapped carefully in one of Emma's notebooks, was a detailed hand-drawn map of every shortcut and back road in Millbrook Valley, a map that Emma had drawn for a school geography project, complete with alternate routes that would bypass the fog-prone areas of the main mountain road. "Emma drew this?" Dr. Webb asked, examining the map with admiration. "This could cut 20 minutes off our transport time to the hospital." Rex sat beside Emma, his intelligent eyes moving between the map and the 3 patients, as if he had orchestrated this entire sequence to ensure that everyone would receive the help they needed as quickly as possible. The rescue operation was becoming something more than just an emergency response. It was turning into a demonstration of how intelligence, compassion, and community cooperation could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. And at the center of it all was a German Shepherd whose abilities seemed to transcend everything anyone thought they knew about canine intelligence. The controlled chaos of the rescue operation took a devastating turn when Emma's innocent question shattered the evening's heroic atmosphere like glass against stone. As the medical teams prepared to transport the 3 patients using Dr. Webb's navigation shortcuts, Emma approached Officer Patricia Hendricks, who had regained consciousness and was being loaded into the ambulance. "Officer Hendricks," Emma said softly, her young voice carrying genuine concern. "Are you feeling better? I'm so glad Dad and Rex found you." Patricia's eyes, though clouded with pain medication, focused on Emma with recognition. "Emma Miller, right? Your father, he's the carpenter who's been having trouble with the zoning violations." The words hit Clyde like a physical blow. In the intensity of the rescue, he'd somehow managed to forget about the stack of official notices sitting on his kitchen table. Citations for operating his woodworking business from a residential property, complaints about noise ordinances, and the final warning about unpermitted workshop expansions that Patricia had been required to issue just 2 weeks ago. Jake Morrison, who had been coordinating the patient transport, overheard Patricia's comment and turned to look at Clyde with new awareness. "Wait, you're the guy who's been fighting the town council about the workshop permits?" The question hung in the fog-thick air like an accusation. Suddenly, the rescue scene felt different. What had been a heroic community effort moments before now carried undertones of official scrutiny and legal complications. Dr. Elena Vasquez paused in her monitoring of Tommy's vital signs, her expression shifting as pieces of information clicked into place. "Clyde, those violations, they're related to safety concerns about operating heavy machinery near residential areas, aren't they?" Emma looked confused, glancing between her father and the adults whose voices had taken on a formal, uncomfortable tone. "Dad, what are they talking about? What violations?" Rex, who had been calmly supervising the loading of the patients, suddenly became agitated. The dog moved to position himself between Clyde and the growing circle of officials, his body language protective but tense. It was as if Rex sensed that the harmonious cooperation of the rescue was fracturing into something more adversarial. "Look," Clyde said, his voice tight with defensive frustration, "I know I'm behind on some paperwork, but tonight isn't about zoning permits. We've got 3 injured people who need help." "Of course," Jake said quickly, "and you've been incredible tonight. But Clyde, you have to understand, we're mandatory reporters. When someone's involved in an emergency situation and there are outstanding safety violations..." The implication hit Clyde like a sledgehammer. His heroic actions tonight, his willingness to risk his own safety to save others, could actually result in increased scrutiny of his business and living situation. The workshop violations could be used as evidence of unsafe conditions for Emma, potentially triggering a social services investigation. Beth Chen, who had been focused on preparing Patricia for transport, looked up with concern. "Clyde, how long have you been operating commercial equipment in a residential zone? Some of those saws and sanders, if there's been noise complaints from neighbors?" "The Hendersons filed a formal complaint last month," Patricia added weakly from her position on the stretcher. Her words carried the weight of official procedure despite her injured state. Emma's face had gone pale as she began to understand the adult conversation swirling around her. "Dad, are they saying you could get in trouble for helping Officer Hendricks?" "No, sweetheart," Clyde said, but his voice lacked conviction. The truth was more complicated, and Emma was smart enough to hear the uncertainty. Dr. Webb, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward with the authority that came from serving the community. "This is neither the time nor the place for bureaucratic discussions. We have patients who need immediate medical attention." But the damage was already done. The magical unity of the rescue effort had been replaced by the harsh realities of small-town politics and regulatory compliance. Clyde found himself seeing the scene through different eyes, not as a heroic neighbor helping those in need, but as a man whose unauthorized business practices were now under official scrutiny. Rex seemed to sense the shift in emotional dynamics. The dog moved away from the group of officials and approached Jessie, who was being prepared for transport with her broken leg. The teenager had been quietly observing the adult conversation, and her young face showed a mixture of confusion and concern. "Is Mr. Miller going to get in trouble for helping us?" Jessie asked Rex, as if the dog could provide answers that the adults were reluctant to give. The question crystallized something that had been building in Clyde's mind throughout the evening. His workshop violations weren't just bureaucratic inconveniences. They represented a fundamental conflict between his need to provide for Emma and the community's regulations about how he could earn that living. The woodworking business was his only source of income since Sarah's death. The medical bills from her final illness had drained their savings, and the life insurance hadn't been enough to cover the mortgage and Emma's ongoing needs. Operating from his home workshop wasn't ideal, but renting commercial space was financially impossible. "Officer Hendricks," Clyde said, his voice carrying a weight of resignation, "when you're feeling better, we need to talk about those violations. I know I'm not in compliance, but I've been trying to figure out how to fix the situation without losing my ability to support Emma." Patricia's eyes softened despite her pain. "Clyde, what you did tonight, finding those children, coordinating this rescue, it shows the kind of person you are. But the regulations exist for reasons. What if there had been an accident with your equipment while Emma was home? What if the noise complaints escalate to the point where neighbors feel their property values are affected?" The conversation was interrupted by Tommy's weak voice from where he lay on the second stretcher. "Rex saved us," the little boy said, his words slurred but determined. "He knew we were down there. Nobody else knew." Emma knelt beside Tommy's stretcher, her 12-year-old mind working through the complexities of adult problems. "Rex is really smart," she said softly. "He helps Dad with everything. He even knows when the saws are too loud and makes Dad turn them off." The comment hung in the air with unexpected significance. Rex's intelligence, which had been the hero of the evening's rescue, was now being revealed as potentially relevant to the very safety concerns that had generated the violations. Dr. Elena looked at Rex with new interest. "Emma, what do you mean the dog knows about the equipment noise?" "Rex always comes and gets Dad when the neighbor's lights come on late at night. And he won't let Dad use the big saw when he's tired, because that's when accidents happen. Mama taught Rex to watch out for dangerous things." Jake Morrison exchanged a glance with Beth. Both EMTs had observed Rex's extraordinary behavior throughout the rescue, but this added a new dimension to their understanding of the dog's capabilities. "So Rex essentially acts as a safety monitor for your workshop operations?" Dr. Webb asked, his tone thoughtful rather than accusatory. Clyde nodded reluctantly. "Rex has always been protective. He seems to know when I'm pushing too hard or when conditions aren't safe, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm operating a business in a residential zone without proper permits." The fog was beginning to lift slightly, revealing the full scope of the accident scene and the community response it had generated. Neighbors had begun to gather at a respectful distance, drawn by the emergency vehicles and the unusual activity on their quiet street. Among them, Clyde could see Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had filed the noise complaints. Her expression was complex, concern for the injured people mixed with something that might have been respect for the rescue effort, but the underlying tension of their ongoing dispute. Rex moved to the center of the group, positioning himself where he could observe all the humans involved in the conversation. The dog's intelligent eyes seemed to be processing the social dynamics with the same analytical approach he'd brought to the physical challenges of the rescue. "The patients need to be transported now," Dr. Elena said firmly, reasserting medical priorities. "But Clyde, this conversation isn't over. What happened tonight changes some things, but it doesn't resolve the underlying issues." As the ambulances prepared to leave, using Emma's hand-drawn map to navigate the safest route to the hospital, Clyde found himself standing in the road with Rex and Emma, watching the emergency vehicles disappear into the fog. The heroic evening was ending with more questions than answers, and the dog whose intelligence had saved 3 lives was now at the center of a community debate about safety, regulations, and the complex balance between individual needs and collective standards. The morning after the rescue dawned gray and heavy with more than just the lingering fog that clung to Millbrook Valley's hills. Clyde sat at his kitchen table, staring at the official documents that had been delivered at dawn by a somber-faced deputy from the county sheriff's office. Rex lay at his feet, the dog's usual alertness replaced by an unusual restlessness that seemed to mirror Clyde's own internal turmoil. Notice of investigation by Child Protective Services. Preliminary assessment of living conditions and safety concerns. The letterhead read in stark black letters. Emma was still asleep upstairs, exhausted from the emotional intensity of the previous evening. She had no idea that her father's heroic actions had triggered a bureaucratic process that could fundamentally alter their lives together. The irony wasn't lost on Clyde. Saving 3 lives had somehow put his own family at risk. His phone had been ringing steadily since sunrise. First, it was Jake Morrison calling to check on Emma and inform him that all 3 accident victims were stable at the Regional Trauma Center. Tommy had no permanent damage from his head injury, Jesse's leg would heal completely with proper orthopedic care, and Patricia Hendricks was expected to make a full recovery.
The second call came from Mrs. Henderson, his neighbor whose noise complaints had initiated the zoning violation process. Her voice carried an unexpected note of contrition as she explained that she'd witnessed the rescue through her bedroom window and wanted to discuss the permit situation. "Clyde," she'd said, her usually stern voice softened by something that might have been respect. "What you did last night, finding those children, coordinating everything, I had no idea your dog was so capable." But it was the third call that had shaken him most deeply. Dr. Marcus Webb, speaking in his capacity as a longtime member of the town council, had delivered news that changed everything. "The state inspector who handles commercial permit violations is driving down from the Capitol this afternoon," Dr. Webb had explained. "After last night's incident, there's going to be an expedited review of your workshop operations. The fact that Rex demonstrated such advanced problem-solving abilities is being seen as either a significant safety asset or evidence of unsafe conditions that require animal intervention." Clyde pushed back from the table and walked to the window that overlooked his workshop. The building that had been his sanctuary, his means of supporting Emma, now looked different in the morning light. Instead of seeing the carefully organized tools and the half-finished furniture projects that represented his livelihood, he found himself noticing the things an inspector would flag. The residential electrical panel handling commercial-grade equipment, the sound insulation he couldn't afford to install properly, the proximity of dangerous machinery to his family's living space. Rex followed him to the window, pressing his warm body against Clyde's leg in a gesture of comfort that felt almost human in its understanding. The dog's intelligent brown eyes seemed to reflect the same confusion that was tearing at Clyde's heart. How could actions motivated by pure compassion lead to such complicated consequences? The sound of Emma's footsteps on the stairs drew him back to the immediate challenges of the day. His daughter appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing her favorite pajamas, her auburn hair tangled from sleep, looking younger than her 12 years. "Dad, is everything okay? You look upset." Clyde forced a smile, though he knew Emma was too perceptive to be fooled by surface reassurances. "Just thinking about yesterday, sweetheart. It was a big night for all of us." Emma poured herself a glass of orange juice and settled at the table where the official documents lay scattered like landmines in their normal morning routine. Her sharp eyes immediately focused on the CPS letterhead. "What's Child Protective Services?" she asked, reading the document with the fearless directness of childhood. The question hit Clyde like a physical blow. He'd hoped to have time to figure out how to explain the situation, but Emma's intelligence, so much like her mother's, cut straight to the heart of things. "Sometimes when there are safety concerns about how families live, the government sends people to check and make sure everyone is okay," Clyde said carefully. "Safety concerns about us?" Emma's voice carried a note of genuine confusion. "But Dad, we're fine. Rex takes care of us, and you take care of us, and we help each other." Rex moved to Emma's side, positioning himself where she could absently stroke his fur while she processed this new information. The dog's presence seemed to calm her, but Clyde could see the wheels turning in her mind. "Is this because of your workshop? Because of the neighbors complaining about the noise?" Emma asked. "Partly," admitted Clyde. "The permits for running a business from our home, it's complicated, Em. The rules are there for good reasons, but sometimes following them isn't simple." Emma was quiet for several minutes,
her hand moving rhythmically through Rex's coat while she thought. When she spoke again, her words carried a maturity that reminded Clyde how much she'd grown since Sarah's death. "Dad, last night when Rex found those kids and helped Officer Hendricks, that was because he's smart and good, right? Not because our house is dangerous?" "Absolutely," Clyde said it without hesitation. "Rex is remarkable, and what he did last night proves that intelligence and compassion can make incredible things happen. Then why are people acting like there's something wrong with how we live?" The question crystallized something that had been troubling Clyde throughout the sleepless night. The rescue had demonstrated not just Rex's extraordinary abilities, but the strength of their family unit. Emma had responded to the crisis with courage and clarity. Rex had orchestrated complex solutions that saved lives, and Clyde himself had risked his own safety without hesitation to help others. Yet the aftermath was treating them like a problem to be solved, rather than heroes to be celebrated. His phone rang again, interrupting his brooding. This time it was Elena Vasquez, calling from the hospital where she was checking on the 3 patients from the accident. "Clyde, I wanted you to know that Jessie and Tommy's mother is here. She's asked specifically to speak with you and Emma about what happened last night. The children have been telling everyone about Rex's incredible abilities." "How are they doing?" Clyde asked, grateful for news that focused on the positive outcomes rather than the bureaucratic complications. Jessie's neurological tests came back completely normal. Jessie's surgery went perfectly, and she'll be walking normally within 6 weeks. Patricia is being discharged this afternoon. She paused. "Clyde, their mother wants to write a letter of commendation for you and Rex to the town council. She says what you did was nothing short of miraculous."
After ending the call, Clyde found Emma reading through more of the official documents with the systematic thoroughness she'd brought to her school assignments. Rex had positioned himself where he could monitor both the kitchen and the front door, his alertness suggesting he sensed the importance of the morning's events. "Dad," Emma said without looking up from the papers, "it says here that they want to interview me about living conditions and safety protocols. What kind of questions do you think they'll ask?" Clyde sat down across from his daughter, seeing in her serious expression the same analytical intelligence that Sarah had possessed. "They'll want to know if you feel safe, if you have everything you need, if adults are taking good care of you." "And I do, and I do, and you are," Emma said matter-of-factly, "so that should be easy." But Clyde knew it wouldn't be that simple. The investigators would be looking for evidence of unsafe conditions, potential hazards, violations of residential zoning laws that put a child at risk. They wouldn't necessarily understand the financial pressures that had forced him to operate his business from home, or the way Rex's intelligence provided an additional layer of safety that no regulation could account for. Rex suddenly stood and moved to the front window, his body language shifting to high alert. A moment later, Clyde heard the sound of a car pulling into their driveway, earlier than expected, but unmistakably official in its timing. "The inspector's here," Clyde said, his voice carrying a weight of resignation. Emma joined Rex at the window, looking out at the sedan with government plates. "Dad, whatever they ask, I'm going to tell them the truth about how good you are, and how smart Rex is, and how safe I feel here." As they watched a woman in a business suit emerge from the car and begin examining the exterior of their property with professional scrutiny, Clyde realized that the morning's real test wasn't about permits or regulations. It was about whether the bond between a father, daughter, and their extraordinary dog was strong enough to survive a system that measured safety in terms of compliance rather than love. Rex positioned himself between Emma and the window, his intelligent eyes fixed on the approaching inspector with the same protective intensity he'd shown during the rescue. Whatever happened next, Clyde knew they would face it together, but the uncertainty of the outcome cast a shadow over everything the previous evening's heroism had achieved. State Inspector Margaret Thorne moved through Clyde's workshop with the methodical precision of someone who had conducted hundreds of safety evaluations. Her clipboard held a checklist that seemed to grow longer with each piece of equipment she examined, and her expression remained professionally neutral as she documented violation after violation.
Rex followed her movements from a respectful distance, his intelligent eyes tracking every detail of her assessment. "Mr. Miller," Inspector Thorne said, not looking up from her documentation, "this circular saw is rated for industrial use, but it's connected to a residential electrical panel that's not designed to handle this amperage load. I had an electrician check the wiring when I installed it. He said it was adequate for the equipment I was using." "Do you have documentation of that electrical inspection?" Thorne asked, her pen poised over the checklist. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Clyde had paid for the electrical work in cash during the desperate months after Sarah's medical bills had decimated their savings. The electrician had been recommended by a friend, and the work had been done quickly and affordably, but without the formal permits and documentation that would satisfy an official inspection. Emma stepped forward with the courage that had sustained her through her mother's illness and death. "Inspector Thorne, my dad's really careful with all his equipment, and Rex always watches when Dad's working to make sure everything is safe." For the first time since her arrival, Inspector Thorne's professional composure flickered with genuine interest. "Emma, isn't it? I'd like to hear more about how Rex monitors safety conditions." Rex, as if understanding that he was the subject of discussion, approached Inspector Thorne with measured steps. The dog's demeanor was calm but alert, demonstrating the same intelligence that had orchestrated the previous night's rescue. "Show her, Rex," Emma said softly. What happened next defied everything Inspector Thorne thought she knew about workplace safety assessments. Rex moved to the main power switch for the workshop and sat beside it, his eyes fixed on Clyde. When Clyde nodded, Rex carefully used his nose to flip the switch, cutting power to all the equipment. Then the dog began a systematic patrol of the workshop, stopping at each potential hazard point. He paused beside a stack of lumber that was improperly secured, nudged an extension cord that was creating a trip hazard, and positioned himself in front of a ventilation fan that wasn't functioning properly. "This is extraordinary," Inspector Thorne murmured. Her professional detachment gave way to genuine amazement. But Rex wasn't finished. The dog approached Inspector Thorne directly and began what could only be described as a guided tour. He led her to a fire extinguisher that was properly mounted and easily accessible, then to emergency shutoff switches that Clyde had installed for each major piece of equipment. Rex demonstrated how he could activate these switches in case of an emergency. "This is extraordinary," Inspector Thorne said, making rapid notes. "I've never seen anything like this level of safety awareness from an animal." Emma beamed with pride. "Rex learned from Mom when she was still alive. She was a veterinarian, and she taught him about dangerous situations. He's been taking care of us ever since she died." The mention of Sarah seemed to shift something in the inspector's demeanor. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said to both Clyde and Emma. "How long has it been?" 3 years, Clyde replied. "Rex has been... he's been our constant companion through everything. Last night, when he found those injured children and coordinated the rescue, he was doing what he's always done, watching out for people who need help." Inspector Thorne was quiet for several minutes, continuing her examination, but with a different energy. She seemed to be seeing the workshop not just as a collection of violations, but as the workspace of a family trying to survive and thrive despite difficult circumstances. "Mr. Miller," she said finally, "I need to be honest with you. From a regulatory standpoint, this operation has serious compliance issues. The electrical work, the noise concerns, the proximity of commercial equipment to a residential structure. These are all legitimate safety concerns." Clyde felt his heart sink. "I understand. I know I'm not in full compliance, but Inspector Thorne, this workshop is how I support Emma. The custom furniture work I do here, it's our only income." "However," Inspector Thorne continued, holding up a hand to stop his response, "what I've observed today challenges some fundamental assumptions about how safety is maintained in a workspace." She gestured to Rex, who was now sitting beside Emma, with the calm alertness of a professional guardian. Traditional safety protocols rely on human vigilance, proper equipment maintenance, and regulatory compliance. But this dog provides a level of continuous monitoring that exceeds what most commercial operations achieve. Emma looked up at Inspector Thorne with hope flickering in her young eyes. Does that mean we might not be in trouble? It means the situation is more complex than my initial assessment suggested, Inspector Thorne replied carefully. Rex's abilities represent a unique safety asset, but they don't eliminate the need for proper permits and code compliance. The workshop door opened, and Dr. Elena Vasquez entered carrying a manila folder thick with documents. Inspector Thorne, I hope you don't mind the interruption. I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I have some information that might be relevant to your assessment. Elena handed the folder to Inspector Thorne. These are veterinary and behavioral assessment records for Rex, compiled over the past 3 years. They document his training, his intelligence levels, and his demonstrated ability to recognize and respond to emergency situations. Inspector Thorne opened the folder and began reading, her eyebrows rising as she processed the information. These intelligence scores, they're extraordinary. And these incident reports. Rex has prevented no fewer than 6 potential accidents in this workshop over the past year. He's alerted Clyde to equipment malfunctions, stopped dangerous operations when conditions weren't safe, and even called for help when Clyde was injured by directing neighbors to his location. Called for help? Inspector Thorne looked skeptical. Emma nodded eagerly. Rex has different barks for different problems. He has a specific bark that means come help, and another one that means danger, and another one that means medical emergency. All our neighbors know Rex's signals. As if to demonstrate, Rex moved to the workshop door and began barking in a distinctive pattern. 3 short barks, followed by a longer howl. Within minutes, Mrs. Henderson appeared at the door looking concerned. Is everything all right? Mrs. Henderson asked, then noticed Inspector Thorne's official clipboard. Oh, the inspection. Inspector Thorne studied Mrs. Henderson with professional interest. You're the neighbor who filed the noise complaints. Yes, I did. But after what happened last night, Inspector, I need to tell you something important about this family and that remarkable dog. What followed was a testimony that transformed Inspector Thorne's understanding of the situation. Mrs. Henderson described how Rex had alerted her to a gas leak in her own home 6 months earlier, how Emma had helped her elderly mother with grocery shopping throughout the winter, and how Clyde had repaired her porch railing free of charge after a storm damaged it. The noise complaints, Mrs. Henderson continued, they were legitimate, but I never understood the context. This man is trying to support his daughter while maintaining the same level of safety and care that most commercial operations can't achieve. And he's doing it with the help of an animal whose intelligence I've never seen equaled. Inspector Thorne looked around the workshop with new eyes, seeing not just violations, but a functioning family business that had been providing for a child and contributing to the community despite operating outside traditional regulatory frameworks. Mr. Miller, she said finally, I'm going to make an unusual recommendation in my report. The violations are real and need to be addressed, but the safety protocols you've developed, with Rex as a central component, represent an innovative approach to workplace safety that deserves consideration. Clyde felt a flicker of hope. What does that mean, practically? It means I'm recommending a conditional compliance path rather than immediate shutdown. You'll need to address the electrical and permit issues, but you'll have time to do it properly while maintaining your business operations. And Rex's role as a safety monitor will be formally documented as a mitigating factor. Emma hugged Rex tightly, and the dog's tail wagged for the first time since Inspector Thorne's arrival. But even as relief began to replace anxiety, Clyde knew this was just the beginning of a longer process. Inspector, he said, what about the Child Protective Services investigation?
Inspector Thorne's expression grew serious again. That's a separate process with different criteria, but my report will reflect what I've observed here. A father who's created an unusually safe and nurturing environment for his daughter, supported by an animal whose capabilities extend far beyond typical pet behavior. As Inspector Thorne packed up her equipment and prepared to leave,
She paused to observe Rex one final time. The dog sat calmly beside Emma and Clyde, his intelligent eyes reflecting an awareness that seemed almost human in its depth. "In 20 years of safety inspections," Inspector Thorne said, "I've never encountered anything quite like this. Rex isn't just a pet, he's a partner in maintaining safety and security for this family. That's going to be reflected in my official recommendations." The external pressure that had threatened to tear their family apart was beginning to transform into something else entirely, an opportunity to prove that love, intelligence, and community cooperation could create safety and security that no regulation could mandate or replace. The town hall meeting 3 days later drew the largest crowd Millbrook Valley had seen in decades. Citizens packed the wooden chairs that faced the council podium, while overflow attendees stood along the walls and spilled into the adjoining corridor. The agenda had been posted simply as "Discussion of Residential Business Permit Variance, Miller Property," but everyone in town understood this was about much more than zoning regulations. Clyde sat in the front row with Emma beside him and Rex lying calmly at their feet. The German Shepherd's presence had been specifically approved by the council after Dr. Elena Vasquez submitted a formal request documenting Rex's role as both evidence and participant in the proceedings. Emma held a folder containing her own contribution to the evening's presentation, a detailed report she'd compiled about Rex's abilities, complete with charts and photographs documenting his safety interventions over the past year. Mayor Robert Chen called the meeting to order and gestured toward the unusual gathering. "Before we begin formal proceedings, I want to acknowledge that this situation has captured our community's attention in ways that extend far beyond typical permit discussions. We're here tonight to find a path forward that serves both regulatory requirements and community needs." Town Council President Joyce Murphy opened her own thick folder of documents. "We've received Inspector Thorne's report, along with supporting documentation from Dr. Vasquez, testimonies from community members, and a rather remarkable presentation from young Emma Miller. Additionally, we have representatives from the state's innovative safety pilot program joining us by video conference." On the large screen behind the council podium, 2 officials from the state capitol appeared by video link. Dr. Sarah Blackstone, Director of Regulatory Innovation, and James Martinez, Coordinator of Alternative Safety Protocols, would be observing the proceedings to evaluate whether Clyde's situation might qualify for an experimental compliance pathway. "Mr. Miller, would you like to begin by explaining your proposal?" Clyde stood, feeling the weight of the community's attention. 3 days of preparation had helped him organize his thoughts, but standing before the packed hall still felt overwhelming. Rex seemed to sense his nervousness and moved to sit beside him, providing silent support. "Thank you, Mayor Chen. 3 years ago, when my wife Sarah died, I faced a choice: find a way to support Emma while staying in the community that had been our home, or relocate somewhere with more employment opportunities but fewer support systems. The workshop business wasn't my first choice, but it allowed me to be present for Emma while earning enough to meet our basic needs." He gestured to Rex, who was sitting with perfect composure despite the crowded, noisy environment. "What I didn't anticipate was how Rex would become an integral part of ensuring safety in our work environment. Sarah had trained him in basic emergency response when she was still practicing veterinary medicine, but his abilities have developed far beyond anything we initially expected." Emma stood up, her young voice carrying clearly through the hushed hall. "May I show everyone what Rex can do?" With Mayor Chan's permission, Emma began a demonstration that left the audience mesmerized. She had Rex identify every emergency exit in the town hall, locate the fire extinguisher, and demonstrate his ability to activate an emergency alarm by pulling a cord with his teeth. But the most impressive part came when Emma asked Rex to assess the crowd for potential medical emergencies. The German Shepherd moved methodically through the audience, pausing beside Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who had been diabetic for years. Rex sat beside her chair and placed his nose gently against her arm, then looked back at Emma with a specific expression that the 12-year-old immediately understood. "Mrs. Patterson, Rex thinks your blood sugar might be low. Do you have your testing kit with you?" Mrs. Patterson looked surprised, but pulled out her glucose meter. After testing, her face showed amazement. "He's right. I'm at 68, which is getting into the danger zone. I hadn't even noticed the symptoms yet. The demonstration continued with Rex identifying a man with elevated blood pressure and a teenager whose anxiety was causing hyperventilation. Each time, the dog's assessments proved accurate, showcasing abilities that went beyond trained tricks to something approaching medical intuition. Dr. Blackstone's voice came through the video conference system with obvious excitement. Mr. Miller, what we're observing represents a paradigm shift in how we think about safety monitoring. Traditional regulations assume human-only oversight, but Rex is demonstrating capabilities that exceed most technological safety systems. James Martinez leaned forward on the screen. Emma, can you explain how you and Rex developed these protocols?
Emma's confidence grew as she described their collaborative approach. After Mom died, Rex seemed to understand that he needed to help take care of things. I started keeping a journal of everything he did that seemed like he was solving problems or preventing accidents. Then I began teaching him specific signals and responses based on what I observed. She opened her folder and displayed photographs and charts that documented Rex's interventions. This graph shows how workshop accidents decreased after Rex started monitoring Dad's work. And this chart correlates Rex's alert behaviors with actual safety incidents that were prevented. The audience was completely silent, absorbed in Emma's presentation. Here was a 12-year-old girl demonstrating analytical skills that would impress graduate students while showcasing an animal whose abilities challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence and training. Dr. Elena Vazquez stood to address the council. As a medical professional, I can attest that Rex's diagnostic capabilities are unprecedented. He's identifying medical conditions before patients are symptomatic, monitoring safety conditions with greater consistency than human oversight, and responding to emergencies with coordination skills that rival trained first responders. Council President Murphy reviewed the documents before her. Dr. Vazquez, from a medical standpoint, how do you explain Rex's abilities? Frankly, I can't fully explain them, Elena admitted. His olfactory capabilities allow him to detect chemical changes associated with medical conditions. His observational skills let him identify behavioral patterns that indicate danger, and his problem-solving abilities demonstrate cognitive function that approaches human-level reasoning. Dr. Chen turned to the video conference. Dr. Blackstone, what would be required for Mr. Miller's situation to qualify for your alternative compliance program? Dr. Blackstone consulted her notes. The Innovative Safety Pilot Program allows for non-traditional approaches to regulatory compliance when they demonstrably exceed standard safety outcomes. Rex's documented capabilities, combined with the family's safety record and community support, make this an ideal test case. However, James Martinez added, formal participation would require comprehensive documentation, regular assessments, and agreement to participate in ongoing research about animal-assisted safety protocols. Emma raised her hand. What kind of research? We'd want to study Rex's methods, document his training techniques, and potentially develop protocols that could be replicated with other animals in similar situations, Dr. Blackstone explained. This could revolutionize how we approach workplace safety in small-scale operations. The prospect of Rex becoming part of a state research program brought murmurs of excitement from the audience. Mrs. Henderson stood up from her seat in the middle of the hall. Mayor Chen, I'd like to formally withdraw my noise complaints and submit a letter of support for the Miller family's permit variance. What I've learned about this family and their remarkable dog has changed my perspective completely. One by one, other community members stood to voice their support. Pete from the auto shop offered to help with proper electrical installations. The local hardware store owner volunteered materials for workshop improvements. Even the bank manager suggested a low-interest loan program for permit compliance upgrades. Council President Murphy looked around the packed hall with something approaching wonder. In 30 years of local government, I've never seen a zoning discussion generate this level of community engagement and support. Dr. Blackstone's voice carried through the video system with formal authority. Based on tonight's presentations and demonstrations, the State Regulatory Innovation Office is prepared to offer the Miller family participation in our Alternative Compliance Pilot Program. This would allow continued workshop operations under special permit conditions while Rex's safety protocols undergo formal documentation and study. Clyde felt tears in his eyes as he looked around the hall at neighbors who had become advocates, officials who had transformed from obstacles to allies, and a daughter whose intelligence and courage had helped orchestrate this extraordinary resolution. Rex remained calm throughout the proceedings, but his tail began wagging gently as if he understood that the evening's outcome would allow their family to remain together while contributing to something larger than themselves. "Mr. Miller," Mayor Chen said formally, "are you prepared to accept participation in the state's innovative safety program as a pathway to permit compliance?" "Yes," Clyde replied with his voice thick with emotion. "Rex, Emma, and I are ready to prove that love, intelligence, and community support can create safety standards that no regulation could mandate." As the council voted unanimously to approve the variance under the pilot program conditions, the packed hall erupted in applause that seemed to celebrate not just a bureaucratic victory, but a community's recognition that extraordinary circumstances sometimes required extraordinary solutions. The emergency call came at 3:17 in the morning, 6 weeks after the town hall meeting had transformed Clyde's family from regulatory violators into participants in a groundbreaking state safety program. Rex's sharp barking cut through the pre-dawn silence like an alarm, jolting Clyde from deep sleep with the urgent intensity that meant immediate danger. Emma appeared in his bedroom doorway within seconds, already pulling on her shoes with the practiced efficiency of someone who would learn to respond quickly to Rex's emergency signals. "Dad, that's his multiple casualties bark. Something big is happening." Outside their window, the glow of flames flickered against the fog that had settled over Millbrook Valley during the night. Rex was already at the front door, his body tense with purpose, waiting for them to follow his lead into whatever crisis demanded their intervention. Clyde grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and the emergency medical kit that Dr. Elena Vasquez had insisted he keep readily available as part of his participation in the state safety program. "Call 911 and tell them we're responding to what looks like a structure fire. Then call Dr. Vasquez." "Already on it," Emma said, her phone pressed to her ear as she followed her father and Rex into the foggy darkness. The source of the emergency became clear as they reached the end of Elderwood Drive. The old Morrison farmhouse, abandoned for nearly a decade, was engulfed in flames that painted the surrounding woods in a hellish orange light. But what made Rex's behavior so urgent wasn't the fire itself, it was what the dog had detected that human senses couldn't perceive. Rex led them directly to a cluster of cars parked haphazardly near the burning structure. Teenagers' vehicles, Clyde realized with growing alarm. The abandoned farmhouse had become an unofficial gathering spot for high school parties, and someone had been inside when the fire started. "Help! Somebody help us!" The desperate voice came from the direction of the farmhouse, barely audible over the roar of flames, but clear enough to confirm Clyde's worst fears. Rex was already moving, not toward the main structure where the fire was most intense, but around to the back of the property where an old root cellar provided access to the farmhouse basement. The dog's intelligence was calculating escape routes and survival probabilities with the same systematic approach he'd brought to every emergency they'd encountered. "Dad, there!" Emma pointed to a basement window where a face appeared briefly in the smoke-filled opening. "Someone's trapped down there." Rex reached the basement window and began digging frantically at the window well, clearing debris that would allow access to the opening. His actions were purposeful and methodical. He understood that time was critical, but panicked responses would be counterproductive. Clyde knelt beside the window and called into the smoke-filled basement. "How many of you are down there?" "3," came the response from a teenage girl whose voice was already hoarse from smoke inhalation. "My boyfriend hurt his leg really bad when part of the ceiling collapsed, and my friend Sarah is unconscious." Emma grabbed her father's arm. "Dad, did she say Sarah? That might be Sarah Jennings from my school. She's only 14. The situation was catastrophic. 3 teenagers trapped in a basement filling with smoke, one unconscious, one with serious injuries, and a structure fire that was growing more dangerous by the minute. The volunteer fire department was at least 15 minutes away, and by then the basement would be uninhabitable. Rex approached Clyde and began the same communication behavior he demonstrated during the original rescue weeks ago. The dog was assessing the situation and formulating a plan, but this time the complexity was beyond anything they'd faced before. "Rex, show me," Clyde said, trusting the dog's intelligence to guide their response.
What followed was a demonstration of canine problem-solving that defied conventional understanding of animal cognition. Rex led Clyde to an external basement entrance that was partially blocked by fallen debris from the fire. The dog began moving stones and boards with surgical precision, clearing a path that would allow human access to the trapped teenagers. But Rex wasn't working alone. The dog's earlier barking had awakened other neighbors, and Jake Morrison, the EMT who had responded to the original accident, arrived with his emergency equipment. Dr. Elena Vasquez appeared moments later, having responded to Emma's call with the dedication that made her invaluable to the community. "Jake, we've got 3 kids trapped in the basement, 1 unconscious, 1 with leg injuries, smoke inhalation for all of them." Rex abandoned his debris-clearing work and approached Dr. Vasquez, then led her to a specific position near the basement entrance. The dog's behavior was urgent but controlled. He was positioning the medical team for maximum efficiency when the rescue began. "Clyde, that basement is going to be fully smoke-filled within minutes. We need breathing apparatus to safely extract them." That's when Rex demonstrated the most extraordinary problem-solving behavior of his career as an emergency responder. The dog ran to Jake's ambulance and began pawing at the equipment compartment that contained emergency oxygen supplies. When Jake opened the compartment, Rex carefully extracted a portable oxygen tank and breathing mask, carrying them back to the basement entrance. "He knows exactly what we need," Alina said with amazement. "It's like he's conducted emergency medical training." Anne appeared at Clyde's side, carrying a rope from their workshop and wearing the safety gear that had become standard equipment in their home since joining the state pilot program. "Dad, Rex wants us to set up a safety line for extracting the victims." The next 20 minutes unfolded like a precisely choreographed emergency response operation, with Rex serving as the coordinator who seemed to anticipate every need before it arose. Rex guided Clyde through the safest route into the smoke-filled basement, monitored Dr. Vasquez's medical assessment of the unconscious girl, and helped Jake stabilize the teenager with the leg injury. But the most remarkable moment came when the basement ceiling began showing signs of imminent structural collapse. Rex's behavior shifted to urgent alarm, and he positioned himself at the basement entrance, refusing to allow anyone to re-enter the dangerous space. "He's telling us the building's about to come down," Clyde realized. "We need to get everyone out now." The final extraction required every ounce of coordination and courage the rescue team could muster. With Rex guiding their movements and monitoring structural stability, they managed to evacuate all 3 teenagers just before a section of the farmhouse collapsed into the basement where they'd been trapped. As the volunteer fire department arrived and took control of the blaze, the 3 teenagers were transported to the regional trauma center with injuries that were serious but not life-threatening. The unconscious girl regained consciousness during transport. The teenager with leg injuries would require surgery but face no permanent disability, and all 3 would recover fully from smoke inhalation. Standing in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the fire department complete their work, Clyde found himself surrounded by the same community members who had supported his family during the permit crisis. But tonight's events had transformed their understanding of what Rex represented to Millbrook Valley. "Clyde," Dr. Elena said softly, "what Rex coordinated tonight, this was a professional-level emergency response. He identified the crisis, assessed resources, coordinated personnel, and monitored safety conditions throughout a complex rescue operation." Jake Morrison nodded emphatically. "I've been an EMT for 15 years, and I've never seen emergency coordination like what your dog just demonstrated. He was running point on a multi-casualty incident with the skill of a seasoned incident commander." Emma stood beside Rex, her hand resting on the dog's head as she processed the magnitude of what they'd just accomplished. "Rex saved 3 more lives tonight. That makes 6 people whose lives he's saved since the accident with Officer Hendricks." The comment hung in the smoke-tinged air with profound significance. 6 lives saved through the intelligence and coordination of a German shepherd whose abilities had evolved far beyond anything conventional training could explain. Mayor Chan arrived as the emergency vehicles were preparing to leave, drawn by the reports of another extraordinary rescue coordinated by the Miller family and their remarkable dog. Clyde, I've just spoken with the fire chief and the hospital. What happened here tonight? It's going to change how people think about emergency response in small communities. Dr. Sarah Blackstone's voice came through Mayor Chen's phone as she joined the conversation via emergency conference call from the state capitol. The preliminary reports I'm receiving suggest that Rex's performance tonight represents a quantum leap in emergency coordination capabilities. This goes beyond the workplace safety protocols we've been studying. We're looking at community-wide emergency response coordination capabilities. As the sun began to rise over Millbrook Valley, revealing the extent of the farmhouse damage and the success of the rescue operation, Clyde realized that tonight's events had transformed Rex from a local phenomenon into something with implications far beyond their small mountain community. The dog, who had begun as a loyal family pet, had evolved into a coordinator of complex emergency responses, a bridge between human intentions and animal intelligence, and a living demonstration that extraordinary circumstances could produce extraordinary solutions. Standing with Emma and Rex as the last emergency vehicle departed, Clyde understood that their family's story had become something larger than they'd ever imagined, a testament to the power of intelligence, courage, and community cooperation to save lives and transform understanding of what was possible when humans and animals worked together toward common goals. 1 year after the farmhouse fire rescue, the Miller family home had become an unlikely pilgrimage destination for researchers, emergency responders, and families from across the country who had heard about Rex's extraordinary abilities. The modest house on Elderwood Drive now featured a small brass plaque beside the front door that read, "Millbrook Valley Emergency Response Center, founded by the Miller family and Rex." Emma, now 13 and taller by several inches, stood in their transformed workshop explaining Rex's training protocols to a delegation of veterinary behaviorists from 3 different universities. The space that had once violated residential zoning laws now served as a formally recognized research facility where Rex's methods were being documented and potentially replicated with other highly intelligent dogs. The key to Rex's emergency response coordination isn't just his intelligence, although that's obviously extraordinary. It's his ability to assess multiple variables simultaneously and communicate solutions to humans in ways we can understand and act upon. Dr. Sarah Blackstone, who had traveled from the state capitol for the anniversary celebration, watched Rex demonstrate his latest skill development with undisguised amazement. The German Shepherd was now capable of operating simple communication devices, activating GPS emergency beacons, and coordinating with professional emergency services through a specially designed response protocol. Rex's capabilities have evolved beyond our initial research parameters. We're no longer studying animal-assisted safety protocols. We're documenting the emergence of interspecies emergency response coordination that has no precedent in scientific literature. Clyde nodded, still sometimes struggling to believe how dramatically their lives had changed. The workshop business was thriving under the state pilot program, with orders coming from customers who specifically wanted furniture crafted in the facility where Rex provided safety oversight. Emma's college fund, which had been a distant dream just 2 years ago, was now fully funded through a combination of business success and research participation stipends. "Dad, look!" Emma called out, interrupting his thoughts. Rex had just completed a complex problem-solving exercise that involved identifying a mock medical emergency, coordinating multiple responders, and establishing communication with simulated emergency services. He finished in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That's a new record. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't in Rex's documented abilities. It was in the way the community had reorganized itself around the recognition that extraordinary intelligence could emerge in unexpected forms. Millbrook Valley now boasted one of the most sophisticated emergency response systems in the state, with Rex serving as a central coordinator who could assess, communicate, and deploy resources more efficiently than traditional dispatch systems.
Officer Patricia Hendricks, who had returned to full duty with no lasting effects from her accident, served as the liaison between Rex's capabilities and official emergency services. She had become one of Rex's most effective advocates, documenting case after case where the dog's early intervention had prevented minor problems from becoming major emergencies. "The Miller family saved my life," Patricia said during the anniversary celebration, addressing the crowd that had gathered in the town square. "But more than that, they've shown our community that safety and security don't just come from regulations and procedures. They come from intelligence, compassion, and the willingness to work together toward common goals." Dr. Alina Vasquez had established a formal research partnership with the state university to study Rex's diagnostic capabilities, which had proven consistently accurate in detecting early-stage medical conditions before patients showed obvious symptoms. The implications for rural healthcare, where access to specialists was limited, were revolutionary. Rex has identified 14 different medical conditions in community members over the past year, Alina reported to the anniversary gathering. Early detection cases that led to treatments that quite literally saved lives. "We're looking at a paradigm shift in how preventative healthcare could be delivered in underserved communities." Jake Morrison, who had been promoted to Emergency Services Coordinator for the entire mountain region, credited Rex with transforming how emergency responders approached complex rescues. "Rex's coordination during the farmhouse fire became the template for our multi-casualty incident response protocols. We've trained EMT teams from 6 different counties using methods we learned from watching him work." But perhaps the most significant change was in Emma herself. The girl who had started as a bright 12-year-old helping her father navigate a permit crisis had evolved into a nationally recognized expert in animal intelligence and emergency response coordination. Universities were already recruiting her for early admission programs, and she had been invited to present her research at conferences across the country. "I've been thinking about what I want to study in college," Emma said during a quiet moment with her father as the anniversary celebration continued around them. "I want to understand how intelligence works, not just in animals like Rex, but in all the different ways that minds can solve problems and help others." Rex lay beside them, his attention divided between the ongoing celebration and his constant monitoring of the crowd for potential safety concerns. Even during festive occasions, the dog maintained his role as protector and coordinator, ready to respond if his unique abilities were needed. The 3 teenagers whose lives Rex had saved during the farmhouse fire had become regular visitors to the Miller home, volunteering with the research program and helping to document Rex's training methods. Sarah Jennings, the girl who had been unconscious during the rescue, was now planning to study veterinary medicine with a focus on animal cognition. "Rex didn't just save our lives that night," Sarah said during her contribution to the anniversary program. "He showed us that intelligence and courage can take forms we never expected. That night changed how I think about what's possible when different kinds of minds work together." The state's innovative safety pilot program had expanded beyond the Miller family to include 12 other families across the region whose dogs showed unusual intelligence and problem-solving abilities. Rex served as the benchmark for assessment and training, with Emma and Clyde traveling regularly to help evaluate and develop other canine emergency responders. "We've received inquiries from emergency management agencies in 37 states," Dr. Blackstone announced during the celebration. "Rex's methods are being studied for potential implementation in disaster response, search and rescue operations, and community safety programs nationwide." Mayor Chen presented the Miller family with a key to the city and announced that the anniversary of Officer Hendrick's rescue would become an annual Community Intelligence and Cooperation Day, celebrating the ways that different forms of intelligence could work together to solve complex problems. But for Clyde, the most meaningful moment of the anniversary celebration came when Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor whose noise complaints had started the entire permit crisis, presented Emma with a handmade quilt depicting Rex's various rescue operations. "I've learned more about intelligence, courage, and community from your family than I learned in 70 years of life before Rex found those children," Mrs. Henderson said as she handed Emma the quilt. "This is to remind you that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers." As the celebration wound down and visitors began departing, the Miller family found themselves alone with Rex in their backyard, looking up at the same stars that had witnessed their journey from permit violators to community heroes. The workshop hummed quietly in the background, no longer a source of regulatory concern, but a symbol of how innovation and cooperation could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. "Rex, old boy," Clyde said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found Officer Hendricks that night?" Rex looked up at Clyde with the same intelligent brown eyes that had seen so much, solved so many problems, and saved so many lives. His tail wagged gently, as if to say that he had always known their family was meant for something extraordinary. They had just needed the right circumstances to discover it. Emma leaned against her father's shoulder, still holding Mrs. Henderson's quilt. "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud of what we built here?" Clyde wrapped his arm around his daughter, thinking of Sarah and how she had first recognized Rex's unusual intelligence. "I think your mother knew Rex was special from the beginning. She just trusted us to figure out how special when the time was right." Above them, the stars wheeled across the clear mountain sky, while below, 3 members of an extraordinary family, a father, daughter, and remarkable dog, contemplated a future filled with endless possibilities for intelligence, compassion, and service to others. The story that had begun with a single act of courage during a foggy rescue had grown into something that would influence emergency response and community cooperation for generations to come. Rex stretched out beside them, his work for the day complete, but his vigilance never entirely at rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help others, and new ways to demonstrate that the most powerful force in any community was the willingness to use intelligence and courage in service of those who needed help. The rescue that had started with 3 lives saved had grown into something immeasurable, a transformation of understanding that would ripple outward far beyond the mountain valley where it all began. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.